Okay, welcome again. So now we have seen that the issue of the extent of individual liberty and the question of how far the state has a right to restrict it arises in many areas of life, and different states have in fact solved it in different ways, both when it comes to the freedom of action and freedom of expression. Now, when we talked about the legitimacy of state authority, we sort of talked about two extremes. On the one hand, people like Hobbes thought that because the life without state is um, a war of all against all, um, individuals have a reason to give the state total authority. The state on the Hobbesian picture has no requirement to respect the individual freedom or liberty. Indeed, it would be for Hobbes a bad thing to give individuals that freedom, because then that would lead to an erosion of the state and thereby to I mean, the state is exactly there in order to limit that freedom and thereby enable better lives for everyone. Okay, so that's the Hobbesian picture. No total authority of the state. The state had complete authority, complete authority to control the lives of individuals, not for the common good. I mean, it doesn't can't just do that for, according to Hobbes, for because it advances, say, some dictator. The state has to operate for the common good, for what's best for everyone, but that obviously can be in conflict with what's in the interest of an individual. And so for Hobbes, the state has total authority to reinforce what's good for everyone at the expense of individual liberty. So the other extreme is anarchism, where say there's no authority for the state. The respect for individual freedom or liberty precludes any legitimate state authority. The state shouldn't have any power because the individuals should be free to make up their own mind about how they want to live. The state has no right to interfere with that fundamental right to decide your own life. Okay, these two extremes are indeed quite extreme. And arguably the right view is in the middle. And so the slider has been going back and forth. The question is, where is the line, the golden mean, as it were, between those two extremes? And Mill is trying to answer that. And he appeals to a very interesting and powerful idea. So consider you're right to, say, hit someone else in the face. Okay? Now, when do you have that? Arguably, have it when you're defending yourself. Okay, so where does one person's freedom end is when it conflicts with someone else's freedom. Where does my freedom end? It's when my freedom to hit you interferes with your right not to be harmed. Okay, so in that case, you or the state on your behalf have a right to defend yourself against that. Okay, so this is the basic idea. Okay, so in On Liberty, John Stuart Mill tries now to give a general answer to the question what the limits of state authority are. Okay, so here's how he puts his topic. The object of this essay is to assert one very simple principle as entitled to govern absolutely the dealings of society with the individual. So how the society can deal with the individual in the way of compulsion and control, so with regard to compelling, controlling the individual's behavior, whether the means be used physical force in the form of legal penalties, so that the state uses legal penalties like putting someone in prison for what they have done, or punishing them in some other way, or the moral coercion of public opinion, so that by that, I guess he means something like that one condemns certain views and outlaws them in some other way. Okay, so that's the goal, to find a general principle that should that should tell us how the society deal with the individual and restrict what the individual does. So that principle is, so continues the quote, that the sole end for which mankind are warranted, individually collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number is self-protection. So mankind is warranted to interfere with the liberty of a particular individual insofar as that comes from the need to protect itself. So what does that mean exactly? So here's then the statement that you find in the textbook. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. So the basic idea is that the state can limit the liberty of an individual if that helps to prevent harm to others. And I think that's a very powerful idea. That's the only, that's the fundamental principle that explains when the state can interfere is when the actions of the individual pose a threat to others. So Mill goes on to say, his own good, either physical or moral, is not sufficient warrant. Okay, so importantly, this precludes paternalism. So the state cannot interfere just because it's good for you to live a different life. So an individual, cannot be rightfully compelled to do or forbid because it will be better for him to do so, because it will make him happier, because in the opinion of others, to do so would be wise or even right. These are good reasons for remonstrating him, telling him about it, reasoning with him, persuading him or entreating him, but not for compelling him or visiting him with any evil in case you do otherwise. So if someone doesn't want to live a life that's good for them, eats in an unhealthy way, it doesn't do any exercise, does drugs and so on, as long as it's only harm to himself, is not, this doesn't give the state a right to interfere. The state cannot just do something that makes people happier or makes them, even if they think that is right or it would be wise to do that. That does not give rights, only harm causes others. Okay. So now Mill continues to justify that the conduct from which it is desired to deter him, so the state tries to deter the individual from some conduct, must be calculated to produce evil to someone else. So not evil to himself, but to someone else. The only part of the conduct of anyone for which it is amenable to society is that which concerns others. So the only thing that concerns the society, that should concern the society, is insofar as the action has effect on others. In the part which merely concerns himself, his independence is of right absolute. So insofar as the actions have only to do with yourself, you have absolute right, should have absolute right, according to Mill, to do whatever you pleases. Over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is the sovereign. Okay, so this, according to Mill, is the principle that strikes the right balance between protecting from others from harm and respecting the autonomy of the individual. So again, let's look at this from the Hobbesian perspective, where there's a war of everyone against everyone in the state of nature, and the strong ones hit the weaker ones, or force the weaker ones on their will onto the weaker ones. So Hobbes thought that justifies a state that just limits completely what individuals can do and acts on the common good. Mill, on the other hand, thinks no, it doesn't justify that. It just the state just limit what individuals do, their actions, insofar as they actually concern others, and insofar as they harm others in particular. So that to Mill seems a much better principle to to give the state some power, but restrict it. Now we're going to now assess this Millian view. When looking at it in this assessment, in two steps. On the one hand, we want to know a little bit more what the view actually says. Does that idea that seems clearly very powerful and interesting, that the liberty or the freedom of individual is restricted insofar as it causes harm to others, does that really make any sense? Can it be said really in a precise way? And then in the second step, we must look at the arguments for that view. Are there good reasons for accepting this view? Are there better alternatives? What additional reasons for the view than the ones that Mill gives can be provided? But we do that in two steps. And first we look at this question, what the view actually says. In the next video, we're looking at the first part here. We're looking at harming versus offending.